algorithms, the explainable algorithms, is that something, Cristina, that you have seen, or how have you seen this explanation from the actual tools to the users in practice?
So before I answer to that question, I want to say something which maybe most of you know, that optimization is perceived as a black box. And what does it mean? It means that people think that you cannot explain the results. But that's not correct, because mathematics, that's the nature of mathematics, is precise. If you have an equation and an input data, you know what's coming out of it. So this is not the reason that we should not implement optimization tools, because we cannot explain them. We can explain everything. You always trace back to the data or one of your equations if there is something wrong in the model. And about the explainability, but let's say you need an expert who can spend 2 days to find the issue. But I've seen in some softwares which invested time and money to develop a tool. This was even 10 years ago, so without AI, which was pinpointing the issues, because let's say 80% of the time it's always the same issue, the same type of data. Capacity is not correct, or rate is, So they had this kind of decision tree. Did you do this or did you do this? When you did this, did you see this or did you see this? And so on. And in a few minutes, they were able to alone, without an expert, without a consultant, detect the issue and fix it. And 99% of the time is data. So it's something which is in their power to go and check. But this tree algorithm was pinpointing which data, because that's the problem in the solver, that it's a huge amount of data. So if that was possible in some softwares, I think it's possible in all the softwares. It's just up to the vendor to invest, or the people to ask for it. Say, hey, we need this.
Yes, I think that's a good point there, to flag those kinds of data anomalies, perhaps, or it's also something that somebody here in the chat puts to do score analysis, which constraints might be broken, and that could be because it's wrongly defined. So then you figure that out because of it being flagged up, actually. Okay, that's clear. Now, this relates also very much to the explainable parts, showing the actual constraints that are used, whether it's the right model, the right data. Then it also relates to the skill gap that we talked about initially, because it will be something else than Excel that a user will work with. So how can that transition take place? Johan, perhaps starting with you from a company perspective, is the matter of, look, here's a tool, this is the optimization, take care of it, or how does that?
From a company perspective, it's of course about educating the people that need to work with the tools, right? So you bring them along. You need to educate them, and what you will see in practice is that some people will be able to get to the next level needed to work with these kind of tools, and there are people that will not make it. And I think that is something that has happened also before AI, right? This is nothing new. This is what you see continuously over time, is that the roles of people will change. And especially if you look at planning, planning 30, 35 years ago was filling out a spreadsheet, plotting what we would make tomorrow. Today, we are looking 2 years ahead of time, trying to figure out what are the right choices to make with more complexity, but also more variability in the plan. So you need a different skill set. And what you see is that although people might understand the supply model or the supply chain model and know how to plan, they might not be able to get towards that next level of understanding how to do the same thing, but now with an optimization tool, instead of putting numbers in place yourself and trying to fix what's going on. And educating them, I think that's the challenge. And what you will see along the line, you will see that people will not be able to make to bridge the gap. And for those, you need to find a different solution, right? It can be inside of the company or even outside of the company. It's but I think that is not only for planning. That is
it's a fair point. Of course,
when roles develop.
Yes, when roles develop, it's indeed it's independent of new methods that is being used. Just techniques change, the business might even change. So resistance to that or openness to learning is always crucial. That education part and getting the users fully involved, Cristina, how do you see that from an implementation perspective?
But what I see is that basically, because this is what's the, let's say, the beauty of supply chain, that all supply chains works the same, right? It's always about the material flow. Basically what I'm trying to say is that you can capture that in equations in Excel. This is what the planners do. They have the equations, the constraints in Excel, and then they just move them to a software. So there is no change in logic, there is no change in constraints, there is no change. So if they understand how planning works and optimization works in Excel, they can understand it in a software. What the software brings more is first the integration, that you can integrate the data, the automatization, the end-to-end visibility in a network, which you cannot do in Excel, to have an Excel for all the regions of the world. And then, of course, you have this element of optimization, which brings you a better plan than what you can do in Excel. But the principles are the same. Nothing changes. And here I also want to say that people think that, oh, if we use our optimization model, this is the solution. No, that is the mathematical solution, but that's different than the business solution. And for the business solution, you need the planner because he has the business knowledge. So he takes the mathematical solution and enriches it with his industry knowledge. And then you get the business solution. And then how can a planner enrich the mathematical solution if they don't understand it? They are supposed to understand, and they do because it comes from Excel. And that's what I said at the beginning. There is this perception of black box, we cannot understand it, and that's not correct. Of course, a planner should not know mathematics or how to say, debugging tool, technical, like what Andreas said. They don't need to implement a solver like the technical part. But the optimization reflects the planning process. And if they can do it in Excel, they can do it also in the software. So for me, if is one thing you can remember from me, is this, that you can educate everybody. And of course, it's a learning curve and you need patience. You need a person who doesn't speak technical terms all the time and explain everything in plain English. But I've seen it. I've seen it many times. And in those projects, the planners become the masters of the tool. They become experts, and then they enhance the tool. They find new ways to use it. They become very knowledgeable, very, how to say, creative. They say, oh, what if we do this? What if we do that? They are not intimidated by the tool when they have this transparency. They understand the formulation. They understand it's exactly what they are doing in Excel with some extra benefits.
Yeah. So it's about capturing their current process, baking that into clear rules, but they should understand initially their current process and what's happening in the business. And that's just translated into something mathematical. And then you need some technical parts to actually run that. But you say if you take them through that step by step from where they are right now, then they can understand what is considered in the model. And they can even change a parameter if it changes within the business context. So it's important, if I may rephrase you, then to get them involved from A to Z and not just say, look, we implement it, we get the business rules out of your, no, get them from start to finish so that they can then run it afterwards. Yeah. That's okay. So,
exactly.
And on that skill gap, and also Andreas, you mentioned it initially, these tools, more tools are becoming available, and so you don't necessarily need PhDs to get these implemented in a company. What do you see there in terms of the skill gap of training people? Does that happen within academia? What are some best practices to get people up to speed on those new tools?
Well, I mean, I guess it's up to the universities to make sure that these optimization is in some way or other taught in the curriculum, right? That's, I guess, the easy answer to that. But maybe if I can just make a comment to what was said before, sure, about like tools and optimization. I think it's a very good point that, you know, we should always see these things as tools, and they're not there to like replace anyone. And that can even be said in a more general way about AI, right? Everyone's talking about AI and how this will take everyone's job. And like Johan said, I mean, you know, some people will not be able to adapt, and yeah, that's a pity. But I mean, if you can use this tool, which it is, to your advantage, then you can build much more amazing things, right? And the same is true for optimization. I mean, yeah, it's true that it's somehow seen as this black box, and yeah, if we can educate people on how it works, then it's a massive tool that can be used to produce like very nice solutions, and that's how we should see it, really.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think that if you look at best practices out there, is what you see that there is a good collaboration between, and we talked about the in-house expert earlier. I think that having a middleman translating business requirements into technical requirements, and whether that's in-house or that you hire somebody with that perspective, I think both are okay, but what you see is in the middleman taking the planners along, understanding the business requirements, translating that into the technical requirements, and work together to install the optimization tool and make sure that it works. Then you indeed see the enthusiasm of the planners arise as soon as they start understanding it, and with that, they start using it. So in that sense, making sure that you have understanding throughout the chain from planner to the technical expert, I think that is important.
Yes. Okay. Very clear. Maybe an important point, and I also see some things here in the chat. I mean, we've already mentioned a couple of companies for which, for instance, Cristina has implemented solutions, but there are many other tools out there as well. I think I see Geoffrey and Meinolf, they're talking about Inside Opt, I know, as well as Timefold. So those are some tools that are used. There are these other providers. There are also, there's OR tools, there are Python-based tools. Maybe, Cristina, can you briefly touch on some of these? Probably some of these are also mentioned in the Optimization for All hub, but let's briefly touch on it, because I do see some comments and people wanting to put forward their tools, which I'm fine with. We don't go into full marketing here of different tools, but it would be nice to get a bit of an overview. What kind of tools are there for people to do it themselves, to do it with a partner? Can you maybe sketch a bit of that?
Okay, so I'm talking about strictly supply chain. So the common practice in supply chain is that, hey, let's implement a planning tool, which the main benefits are this automatization, integration, end-to-end visibility. And then we might get to optimization. So optimization is like a module on the top of a huge planning tool, which takes years to implement. But somehow, sometimes people think that this is the only way to optimization. But you can only install optimization. For example, you can do planning, data, and so on in your ERP system, and install an optimization tool. Like, for example, you mentioned OR tool. That's free. It's in Python. Yes. It has open source solvers. So if your company is small, you don't need to install a €2 million planning tool. You can just use even Excel, even the ERP system, and enhance it with all these open source tools that are out there. Of course, in supply chain, when companies are very big, they need a lot of computational power. So it's not about sophistication, but power. And then, yeah, you need to pay for that. But before you do, check if you actually need a planning tool, or just you're happy by planning in Excel and you want to enhance that. You're happy planning, I don't know, in another tool. And then from optimization, you can also attach a reporting tool. So the results of the optimization go to the reporting tool, which this happens already. So this is the only thing I would say, that I have nothing against planning tools. Sometimes you need it, but sometimes the one you have, it's okay, but you just want to make the plan better, and you just attach an optimization tool, and you say, well, but then what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is it's very fast. Because you implement a planning tool, it can take 1 year, 3 years, depending on the size of the company. But an optimization model is very fast to implement. You can do it in 2-3 months. So then, and it's also much cheaper. So that's my comment.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think you need different scales of complexity and ways to implement yourself or with partners. You can start at smaller scales as well. I see some more comments coming up. Okay, maybe Andreas, Johan, or Cristina, before we go to the Q&A section, does any of you still have any points that you do want to get across on any of these topics?
So one point I would like to say is that I also see, let's say, a problem with some tools. They are not very user friendly, and this is one of the reasons that people go back to the Excel. As Johan said, they offer flexibility. You can do things quickly, but then when you open a planning tool which has 100 buttons and so much functionality, and it takes 40 clicks to see your demand, then that's a problem, you know. So we need to develop tools which are more user friendly, a clean thing which does 3 things and does them well. So when you choose a software, I encourage you to think about that, because when you have to use that tool every day and you need to do all those clicks which are unnecessary, it becomes frustrating. And you also lose the planners in the implementation phase when they need to test and they need to validate, and they need to do that on the top on their business work, and they need to do all the clicks, and it's a bit frustrating.
Yes, it's true.
So this also contributes to this resistance to change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a fair point there, because especially in supply chain, we're very much, most people are very much numbers driven, focusing on the actual algorithms and everything. But the user friendliness is very important for planners who are in it on a daily basis. So sometimes you might think, oh, who cares that it doesn't look good? Well, if you're in that day to day and you have to indeed go through even many clicks, that is important and does get users to churn. So I think that's a very fair point. Now, okay, I think we've covered a lot of interesting topics and also some best practices or ways to overcome things like explainability, focus on user friendliness, involving the right people in a project that are both technically and business oriented, which might not necessarily be the software provider or the implementation partner, but can be someone independent. Now, let's move on to the Q&A section. I see some questions and some chat popping up. So people, if you have any questions, don't put them in the chat, but put them in the Q&A. I'm fine with you having a discussion on your own in the chat as is going on right now. But maybe also one question that I do have is, not every company has to get a full optimization solution, or as you say, Cristina, start from scratch. What is typically the kind of complexity? Is there any sort of tipping point? Of course, it's not a 1 or 0. It's not that clear cut. But does any of you have any indication of when should you try to implement a structured optimization solution versus just running it in Excel? Is that anything where you have experience? Maybe Johan, will start with you from practice from different companies. Do you have any indication of that?
Yeah, I think that it is about complexity of the decisions that you want to make. I have seen situations where we're talking about raw materials and we only had 5 vendors where we could buy one certain type of raw material. But the complexity of buying the raw material over time, with pricing, with quality of the product, etc., made it so complex for a human to compute what is the optimal situation, that we have built a linear programming model for that to compute all the possibilities and come up with the right or the best solution for the long term. And we always did that very manual in an Excel environment, which was good, but not good enough when in a later stage they became more scarce. So I think complexity is the driver for having optimization tools in place. And that can be because you have many variables, like although it was only 5 suppliers giving you one feedstock, or where you have many items. I've had a situation where we were running a shop floor controlling with 2,000 orders, 20,000 order lines, and that was only order lines that were actually released onto the shop floor. Yeah, planning that manually is simply impossible because of the sheer numbers. So you need some kind of tooling, in this case a heuristic model, to make sure that you understand your constraints, you build them into your model, and then your tooling does what you as a human cannot do yourself, and where Excel is simply not good enough for anymore.
Yes, it needs to be a certain degree of complexity. Indeed. Cristina, Andreas, anything where you see that tipping point?
I can add to what Johan said by giving an example. So there is, let's say, or whatever, you have all the companies which are globally, and say, well, because we have operations, I don't know, everywhere, we need a planning tool to bring the data together, to have this visibility, what I mentioned. Yeah. But then they installed the tool, and you realize actually they were doing the planning by region, and the regions, they don't connect. There are no flows between the regions. So actually, they didn't need the planning tool to plan globally, when even after they installed the tool is still done by, like, one person was doing it in Excel for France, and in the software, the same person does it for France, and it doesn't intersect with the other regions. And as it happened, also they had two requirements which are the most important, but that tool was not technically capable of doing it. And then they had to buy new products and workarounds and so on, when all they needed was Excel with a little bit of optimization on the side. That's all they needed. But they ended up implementing all over the world this huge tool, which was not doing the tool requirement.